What I mean by this is that shock therapy type policy prescriptions in the 1990s had different results in the case of Russia, with rising mass poverty as compared to the gradualist transition in the case of China, and the largest reduction in poverty in history in such a short time span, according to Stiglitz. James Falser has rightly argued that what makes the Chinese case rather unique is that instead of destroying old institutions in the expectation that new ones would then naturally emerge, China allowed new capitalist firms to develop within the existing social order. In other words, not mass privatization, but rather creating those enabling conditions within which a private sector could emerge and grow. I would like also to make a short comment on the growing complexity of the development finance system in recent years. Indeed, recent years, at least before the crisis, have also witnessed the continuing expansion and increased complexity of the multilateral development finance system within the emergence, with the emergence of numerous donors, modalities, and instruments which make the system hard to manage. There is growing evidence that multilateral development finance is no longer a system, but rather a non-system with far-reaching implications for both donor and recipient communities. In a post-crisis world, and with multilateral complexity rather than 8 levels being scaled up, the capacity of the development finance system to deliver is thrown into question. To conclude, the global financial crisis of September 2008 had severe effects on many fronts, well beyond the economic sphere. It is rather premature at this early stage of the post-crisis period to talk about the end of the era of the remarketized capitalism, let alone global capitalism, and return to other forms of managed capitalism. It is, however, almost certain that the crisis will have far-reaching implications for the way we think and act in the future, either as rational agents or rational fools, and will also force us to re-examine the conventional wisdom on a broad range of issues, from the overall nexus between mankind and nature to consumerism and what really determines a good life. The predominant focus should, however, be on poverty reduction and on how to take substantial steps forward on that front and lift the 1.4 bottom billion of poor people on the planet out of poverty. Last, but certainly not least, the crisis will hopefully provide us with valuable lessons for the economics profession. On this very last point, let me conclude with what the late Carlos Diaz Alessandro once famously said, paraphrasing Oscar Wilde. In other words, that an economist is someone who knows the shadow price of everything, but the value of nothing. Possibly, and in line with Danny Roderick, it is now time to ask economists for estimates of shadow prices and not for their value judgments. Thank you very much.
George, thank you very much. I want to thank George and all of our presenters for staying within time. So although we started a bit late, we have, if we eat into the coffee hour by just, the coffee period by just 5 minutes, we'll have 15 minutes for questions and discussion from the floor. I heard George say we may or may not be on the brink of a new era in capitalism and a balanced presentation of some of the possibilities there. And just to recap before I open it to the floor, looking back over what I heard today, I think we began with a rather eloquent plea for a better regulated globalization from Danielle. Devesh reminded us, I think quite appropriately, that the debate about varieties of capitalism is not primarily a debate between a European view and an American view, but that we have 2 billion people in the world, more than 2 billion, who are living under market-oriented systems that really bear very little resemblance to what theory would tell us is required for an effective market system, and yet they're in their own very different ways growing very rapidly. Thank you very much, and it may turn out that the authoritarian model is the more successful one. James then threw a pitcher of cold water on the notion that anything would change as a result of the crisis, and pointed not to discussions about varieties of capitalism, but to changes in political power as the solution if people are interested in changing things, and it reminded us, I think, effectively that institutions grow out of the allocation of political power. And James, although you didn't use the quote, I was reminded of the famous Mao Zedong quote, "Political power grows out of the barrel of a gun." It seemed to be the big takeaway from that, and yet I think we all certainly hope that the various varieties of capitalism that compete with one another will not come down to the barrel of a gun. As an American listening to this, and though quite a number of you live in the United States, I don't know that there are actually very many Americans here. I'm struck by on the one hand, the notion that if the U.S. was ever in a position to claim that it was a model, and I think certainly there have been times when American leaders thought that we could, that stock is greatly reduced. The United States, it came from the North. I think maybe that was James' phrase. It sounds like a title for a horror film. It came from the North. It did indeed come from the North, and in fact it came from New York and Washington. And I think that the notion that the U.S. is a model is defunct. On the other hand, I suspect, and perhaps some of you will want to challenge this in the discussion, that there is still a vacuum for global leadership in which it's necessary for the United States to lead. I wish I was more confident that my country can do that well. I'm not very confident, but I'm reminded of the old dictum, and I don't know if it was about capitalism or democracy, that it's the worst possible system except for all the others, and I guess the United States as a global leader is sort of the same thing. It's the worst possible leader except for all the others. So with that, I'd like to open it to questions and comments. There are some roving microphones. I'm going to change a little bit. You needn't phrase it as a question. I think it's fair to make it a comment. Please keep it brief, and please identify both yourself and your institutional affiliation. I saw one hand over here, then Anupam, and then this gentleman. We'll take those three, and then I will dictatorially decide whether we'll collect more ideas before allowing our panel to respond.
Edward Chen from the University of Hong Kong. Now, after reading the write-up and look at the theme of this session, I came with two questions in mind, and which I want to be answered.